What's up, ladies and gentlemen? It's D.H. Thorne here. Well, I'm about to go into my busy season for 2019, the last one. I work at a tree and shrub nursery. So that means for the next month or so, with all possible irony, I'm going to be selling a bunch of Christmas trees to a bunch of Christians. Of course, for me, it's more of a Yule log. I don't really see it as a Christmas tree anymore. But most of the people who are going to be purchasing trees from me are going to be of the Christian persuasion. And so I'll be doing a lot of tongue biting, we'll say. So that basically means that for the next month, it's going to be a little difficult for me to put out personal rituals for people and help people with their consultations. So if you're interested in my services, I would ask that you have some patience if you want to book me, and understand that I will not be available to do any work until after January 1st, pretty much. I might get some things done before then because the season technically ends before Christmas, but I'm often doing a lot of family stuff in between that. So for those of you who are interested in my services, if you want to book something with me now, go to the From the Ashes publishing page. You can, of course, book my services there, and we will talk about a suitable time for our consult or work or whatever we're going to do. If you have an immediate concern, there's always S. Ben Kane and Carrie Darkstar as well. So make sure you go to the Magical Services page of From the Ashes and select someone else if you have a more urgent need. That being said, I wanted to do a series of videos, pre-record some videos for this season, and I asked some of my friends and fans to come up with some video topics for me. And this is a really good idea, actually, because it meant that sometimes you get burnt out trying to think of things to talk to people about. I mean, I have a lot of knowledge and experience and things I could talk about, but sometimes I'm not sure what people want to hear about. And if I'm not having a lot of breakthroughs in certain activities, it can be hard for me to come up with talking points, I guess we'll say. So I asked my friends and fans to give me some ideas for videos, and I came up with a few as well. So for the next couple of videos, for the next couple of weeks, until after the holidays at least, or around when the holidays arrive, I will be doing a lot of pre-recorded work. So some of this you may see the same, I might be wearing the same clothes, whatever. Well, I always wear the same outfits, even though I have like 5 copies of the same shirt, but you get what I'm saying. This first video is actually going to be kind of a big topic, and by no means is this meant to be the complete show. This is just some thoughts on the subject, and I would encourage people to do their own, meditations on it and research and their own considerations, because this is a very important aspect of spirituality. In fact, it's kind of something that gets people into a lot of trouble. So the topic here is the ego and ego dissolution, and an alternate title might be "Kill Your Ego." Everybody else is doing it. Let's go through very basically what I mean by when I talk about ego. Okay. Now there is, of course, the psychological, technical term for ego, and the id, ego, superego, and all that. I'm not at all referring to that, I don't think. Although I have an interest in psychology, I don't really memorize all that stuff. It's not really what I'm about. When I'm talking about ego, I'm talking about the spiritual form of ego. And what is that? Well, look in the mirror and describe yourself. Imagine someone asked you, "Who are you?" and answer that question. Your answer to that question is your ego. That self-identification, that I am this, is your ego. Even when I say something like, "I am the maelstrom, I am the universe," that is still my ego, essentially answering the question. What I truly am is not that answer. That you could never answer what you truly are or what I truly am. And people who are not aware of their true self in any capacity do not have usually a very healthy balance of their ego. Their ego can get out of control. Even the best of us can get insulted or focus too much on ourselves in some way. And I don't mean like greed necessarily. I'm not talking about that, like vanity. That's often a misinterpretation of the concept of ego. Ego is that thing which you define yourself as. That is the best way to describe it. And it is not just the thing you define yourself as, it is the thing that you identify with. It is the thing that you identify with even though that's not what you are. So, for example, if you're Joe the mechanic and your answer to the question is, "Well, I'm Joe the mechanic and this is what I'm about," well, that's your ego. Okay. What you truly are is behind that. What you truly are, I often put it this way: you are not your thoughts, you are the space between your thoughts. So you hear in a lot of spiritual practices and a lot of, various, religious orders and things that the ultimate goal is to somehow dissolve, destroy, and eradicate your ego, as if somehow your ego is some kind of a bad thing. Like you need to get rid of it. You rid yourself of your ego before it's too late, This is a complete misunderstanding and misinterpretation of the original intention of ego dissolution. Ego dissolution is not the eradication of the ego. It is putting the ego in its proper place. There is nothing more egotistical than trying to rid yourself of your ego. That is your ego essentially trying to get, as Alan Watts would say, get one up on the universe. It's trying to say, look at how amazing I am, I have no ego. And this is why when someone confronts me and says, D.H. Thorne, you're so egotistical and, so much ego. And I go, do you realize how much ego it took for you to even say that? How much more ego you need to have to point out the ego in someone else? I'm not saying that just as a way to get you back. It's a sincere understanding of, I would never accuse somebody of having too much ego in that sense, of being, you're too focused on your ego. That's like, why would I care? Like, there's nothing wrong with it. There's this misinterpretation, I think, that happens. I don't know if it's a mistranslation between the cultures or if this is how it is in various Oriental Asian traditions, but there's this idea that you are supposed to achieve enlightenment and nirvana and a removal of ego. Like that is somehow a required goal. Like this is what you're here for. And I couldn't disagree more with that. I think that your higher self, your true self, is what you are. And that includes the ego, because the ego is not a flawed thing. It is a part of the creation. It's the mask that your spiritual truth is wearing so that you can interact with this beautiful game that you've created for yourself. Someone who's achieved nirvana in life is not someone who is, life sucks because it's all illusion and, I have no ego and no self at all. I'm completely selfless. Oh, please, give me a break. No, that would be a perfect example of being arrogantly humble. You know what I mean? It's, look at me, look how lack of ego I have. No, they rejoice in their ego. They rejoice in their body. They rejoice in their life. Now, yes, there are some very... I can't think of the word off the top of my head for all of a sudden, but some people who definitely deprive themselves of comforts and things as a part of having a more blissful life. But there's a reason for that. It's not because that like humility somehow grants you happiness. See, this is a misinterpretation of everything. When you see the monk sitting in a temple somewhere and he's wearing a burlap robe basically, and he's uncomfortable looking, and it's such a simple, humble life. Well, first of all, most of those temples are gilded in gold, and they have, everything that they would ever need. People donate to them whatever they need, and they charge a lot for, people to come stay with them potentially and all this other stuff. No, it's not about that. This humble life that they've experienced for themselves, that they set up for themselves, is so that the pleasure is that much more palpable and visceral. It's kind of like if you're always sitting in cold ice water, or when you do sit in cold ice water, like there's this thing the Scandinavians do, where they'll have a hot tub in the middle of the backyard in wintertime, and they'd run into the bathtub and warm up and then jump out to be cold and then jump back into the bathtub. It's kind of like that. You are creating for yourself a life that is not attached to the physical and ego-oriented pleasures, so that when they happen naturally as part of the course of life, you enjoy them more. For example, a simple meditative breathing exercise can be extremely pleasurable to someone like that. Your rice gruel can be delicious. All of these things have a better experience, but they're not doing it for that experience intentionally. It is just an understanding of health. It is this understanding of balance in their experiences, and being unattached. Now, personally, and many of them would agree that this is not necessary. That is just one possible option. There are many monks, especially like in the Zen tradition, you'll have people who are they're more like students than priesthood. They don't make vows of chastity and all these other things because it's some kind of moral requirement. Rather, they go through this education process to find themselves and understand themselves, and then they come out of it, and many of them return to normal life with an elevated understanding of their self, and they have their enlightened moment. They have their moment of clarity, their moment of disillusionment through their practices, and then they continue that in their private life. They go back to work, they play video games, they do whatever it is that makes them happy. You could say that, you could argue that that's what I did. I had my moment of clarity. I had my moment of ego dissolution. By no means am I enlightened, because there is no one to be enlightened. But I had my moment, that experience that I needed so that I could move forward in my life in a balanced, healthy, spiritual way. And that moment of clarity is there for everybody. It doesn't take a lifetime to get. So what is this thing we're talking about? We're talking about ego dissolution. This is something that's almost impossible to fully describe, because it is an experience that is like seeing a new color for a moment or something like that. It's an experience that is both aware of, but no longer identifying with the self. And some people can have an extended version of this that can go on for a long time. Some might argue that the Buddha had this, that was the achievement of his nirvana. Now, of course, I think that some of this is superstitious stuff or mythology perhaps, but I don't say it's impossible, because I don't see why it wouldn't be. In fact, there's nothing to be ashamed of if you don't achieve that. Like some people say, I don't think it's real because I've never experienced it, and it's kind of an ego thing. No, I would say that even if it is possible, that's fine if you've never experienced it. The goal is not to have that. That is an option. If the goal was to have that, then every part of our experience would lead to that in such a way that it would be unavoidable, and we would die trying. It would be like evolution, it'd be like procreation. Everybody is meant to try to procreate according to our biology. It doesn't mean we do, but it's kind of like our biology is geared very heavily for that. Well, spirituality doesn't work that way. Spirituality doesn't have like this linear progression from A to B. Rather, it has different frequencies of vibration, different intents, different energies. And none of them are better or worse than another. Just like demons, just because they're called demons, and most of them are not demons, but we've talked about that before, these darker entities, if you will, and yes, there are, I'm getting on a tangent, but there are definitely entities that are malevolent in nature. But these entities, even the malevolent ones, are not less than the ones that are of light. They are equal in all ways. They are not better or worse, okay? They just have a different vibration, a different way of doing things. It is our own human perception that creates good, bad, evil, etc. So ego dissolution is accomplished in many different ways in many different cultures. And I would argue that it's actually easier to do than most people realize. It's the question of having ego disillusionment versus recognizing what it means. That can be a difficult challenge for people. Now, some obvious ways you can achieve ego dissolution, perhaps the easiest one, the one that kind of, it's not up to you, it's just going to probably just happen, and all you have to do is just relax and let it happen, would be various kinds of chemical induced, hallucinatory experience, which I'm not advocating or saying anything negative about. There are definitely certain plants. You have San Pedro, which is a cactus which you can buy and grow in the United States, which is totally legal as a window plant, basically. And if you just so happen to have it, there's nothing illegal about it until you process the material and turn it into a tea and ingest it, at which point it becomes illegal because it's an illegal substance. But you will go on a day-long ball-tripping experience where you will have all kinds of things happen to you. Now, personally, I have never knowingly tried any kind of drug that would do that. I've never had mescaline, I've never had DMT, I've never taken peyote, I've never done acid. So I can't speak to that experience personally, although there may or may not be something in the future for me. I may go somewhere where this is something that is legal and lawful to do, or at least no one will know about, and experience those things. And if I do, I will of course have reports on that and try to compare the difference between my version of ego disillusionment and what those who do chemical-induced versions would be. My suspicion is that a chemical-induced ego disillusionment trip is going to be much more visceral and vivid and much more groundbreaking and life-altering. I definitely, or maybe not more life-altering, that's wrong. I think it will be more vivid and visceral. It's like the difference between having a dream that you vaguely remember versus waking up in a pool of sweat going, whoa, that was intense. It's kind of like that. But you remember the dream either way. So ego disillusionment is this moment, well, we'll get back to that moment. Another way you can do this, of course, is through various meditative practices. This can involve trancing while using a drum, or in meditation, or simply just in introspective thought. You can even have this happen. There are even, we'll say Christian monks, believe it or not, and you're not going to want to hear this, some of you, but there are some Christian monks who engage in such high levels of speculative prayer and internalized prayer practice that they can actually achieve trance states which give them transcendental ego disillusionment moments that can happen for them. They become they become filled with the Holy Spirit, basically, and of course they interpret this as joining with God, or God giving them a message or talking to them or something like that, and it's remarkable. Of course, your experience is always going to be through the lens of what you understand. It's always going to be through your lens of experience and your life. So one person's ego disillusionment might be being possessed by a spirit, or having a deep vision given to them by a spirit that gives them a new look on life. Both can be true, both can be accurate, both can be what's happening. So ego dissolution is essentially varying forms of understanding that your ego is a mask, and this mask slipping off for a moment, and you see yourself and the universe as it truly is. Now, you may not have the eyes of God. Some people have reported this, and some people have reported otherwise. The eyes of God are what I call when someone who has this disillusionment moment has like an out-of-body experience. They pull back out of their body. They see their surroundings, they see themselves, and they see the universe. And they have a moment like it's usually, when it happened to me, my version of it, which was limited, my sense of self just dissolved into the world. I believe I saw myself watering a bush at work, and I began to understand. I had known this like through lectures I was listening to, that I was the bush, right? But I began to, while I was thinking about this and sort of meditating while I'm working, it kind of hit me in not a knowledgeable way, but an experiential way, that I was the bush watering itself. The logic that was going through my head was paling in comparison to the experience of the knowledge of that logic. So the logic that was going through my head was like, well, this bush is creating oxygen, which I'm breathing in, which is becoming part of me, and I'm becoming part of this plant by my exhales, the carbon dioxide, and I'm watering this bush. Well, in a way, this bush is causing me to water it, and this bush is kind of like an extension of my lungs. Well, that means that the oxygen around me is an extension of my body, and the air that I'm exhaling is part of its body, and all of this is coming from the sun, and all of this is coming from the earth, and all of this is coming from an explosion that happened millions and billions of years ago before the sun was formed out of a nebula, and then that was formed out of the Big Bang. And as I'm thinking these thoughts, as I'm kind of spiraling through this insanity, if you will, my own sense of self began to dissolve a little bit. And just knowing this is not enough. Again, some of you will hear this and go, yeah, I know that. But there's an experiential version of that where you don't just know it, you become it. You understand it as if it's happening to you. Call it a hallucination, call it a vision, call it whatever you want. But for a moment, I entered a trance state while I was working. I pulled out of my body, essentially. Now, I didn't see my body perfectly, but it was definitely in my imaginatory eye, my third eye. I pulled back out of my body. I saw my surroundings. I began to think, I'm the whole world, I'm everything, and this field of awareness began to expand, and I began to see everything, the trees, the animals in the trees. I started thinking about the little ants crawling along in the blades of grass, and how each one of them has their own universe and their own home, and what it would be like to be that small and have like a city that's like, on a curb somewhere in Manhattan, and all these kind of crazy things that just was blowing through my mind. Like I was helpless. I was buffeted along through this experience. And it was only a few moments. It wasn't like I had it for like an hour, and I start flickering between myself and this knowledge, and only a tiny little, it was almost like taking a handful of sand and throwing it at a hole that was only big enough, like the end of a pen, like the end, like if you take the cap off a pen, and you took a handful of sand and threw it at it. And I was this, forget that, maybe a snow shovel full, like a dump truck full of sand, and whatever fit in there is what managed to filter into my experience. This big giant oceanic feeling of being the universe filtered down into my own experience and paling in comparison. And I was aware of both for a moment. That's the only way I can explain it. Now, it didn't mean that I suddenly knew the names of everyone on Earth. It didn't mean that I had sudden knowledge that I took with me, but I had an awareness of knowing that. Does that make sense? Like I didn't know it myself. It's kind of like when you have a dream and you don't remember it. You remember things about it, but you had one, and you remember Ricardo Montalban was there and saying, the little guy saying the plane, but you don't know what it meant. It's kind of like that. And when I came back down out of this, my life was different. I was crying and laughing hysterically. And the interesting thing was, and people would say to you, well, you've had this experience, what changed? Nothing changed. That's the great irony of Zen. That is the great irony of ego disillusionment. Nothing actually changes. Everything is exactly as it was before. It's just that your perception is different. It's like looking in a mirror. Everything's still there. It's all the same. You just have everything's inverted or different. Now, this experience, you cannot have this experience and be unchanged in terms of your outlook on life. Your perception is what changes, but the universe stays the same. And when your perception changes, this is a form of magic, okay? This is probably the fundamental force of magic that I like to employ. And other people would use other descriptions, but for me, true magic is not bibbidi-bobbidi-boo, I say the right thing 3 times and I light a candle and something happens. It is a shift in awareness that causes reality to do what you want, essentially. It's kind of like shifting into a universe where you get the outcome that you're looking for, simply by changing your perspective, because it's all here. When you understand that your universe is essentially a creation of your own reflection of the events that go on, and how you interpret them and how you react to them. When you understand that, then you understand if you change your reaction, if you change your reflection, the whole thing will change for whatever purpose you want. It will become exactly what you need it to be. This is really powerful, and it's very subtle. This is why sorcerers, when they reach a certain level, do not require, although it's still important to do them, rituals or any other practices. You still should do them because they allow for a reminder, an interface, a celebration of this force. But again, it's not required. It reminds me of, and I've said this before, the ending of a movie named Dragon Slayer, and I won't give the whole ending away, but there's a part where, this guy, he gets these magical powers kind of like by cheating, by using a crystal that his master left him. And he's doing all this magic throughout the movie, and then, of course, this gets taken away, and the end of the movie happens, and he's riding along, and his girlfriend's like, "What's the matter? You look upset." And he's like, "No, I'm fine. I just wish we had a horse," because he's tired of walking. And over the hill comes this beautiful white mare, or white stallion or whatever, to give them a ride, like luck just smiled upon him. And you see the gleam in his eye, and you realize that is the magic. It's not this external thing that you manipulate. It is an internal shift in awareness by your intention and your will creating a change in reality. But what is this "your" that we're talking about? Well, this goes back to the ego dissolution question. What are you? If you look in a mirror and you say, "I'm Bob in accounting, I'm Joe the mechanic, I'm D.H. Thorne the sorcerer," and that is what you believe you are, then you're very limited in what you're capable of doing, because the you that you're talking about is just a tiny little microscopic fraction, not even a fraction, of what is. They believe that the universe, there's only 2 possible answers here. The universe is either infinite or finite. And if the universe is finite, they've done the math and they've decided that if it's finite, it is so big and vast that the knowable universe that we know would be like a grain of sand in an ocean at this point. It's how big the universe would be, because it's so flat. If it is perfectly flat, it's infinite. Now, depending upon how big it is, if it's big enough, you go in the same direction long enough, you will encounter an exact copy of yourself, because there's only so many random fluctuations that can happen in the universe. When you've achieved that totality of infinity, that means anything is possible, technically, so long as it's not without the laws of physics, which means out there somewhere is a Boltzmann brain that is a god that is running everything, or at least everything within its sphere of understanding and so on. There's always possibilities open up, is what I'm getting at. So when you understand that the universe is this vast and you are this tiny, microscopic, insignificant little speck, some people get nihilistic, and some people become accepting of that, because they understand that they're not actually that speck. They're the whole universe doing whatever the speck is doing, and vice versa. The nihilistic perspective is, I'm just a little blade of grass, I'm just a little speck of dust, I don't matter, and when I'm gone, I'll be gone, and everything will forget me. That's because you identify as your ego, and you're not really accepting what's going on. You think that the universe is flawed because it doesn't care about you, basically. Whereas someone who has had ego disillusionment, has achieved that moment, understands that being a blade of grass or a little piece of dust is wonderful. It's a perfect little piece that they can be. It gives them a great perspective and a great understanding and a great game in the universe. Games are meant to be fun, and they're fun because there's limitations and challenges. So there's nothing wrong with being an ego, so long as you don't get confused, so long as you don't become so attached to your ego that you get truly attached to the things that happen to you and feel like you are somehow a victim of reality. That is a trap, and we all go through it. Even people who have had their moment of Zen have had their moment of enlightenment. can kind of regress, because we still live in this biological world that we're living in. We are still kind of, I don't want to say trapped, but we are limited by our biology. And so it's really easy for us to, well, fall back into the habits of a biological organism, so to speak. This isn't like someone who is like, they self-identify as a dragon or something, and I'm self-identifying as universe. This is undeniable, okay? It is a semantical argument perhaps to a skeptic, but it is an undeniable argument. If you are part of the universe, you are the universe. And Carl Sagan even said, and I'll put it to you this way, we are a way for the cosmos to know itself. We are an extension of the cosmos's, or we are the cosmos's consciousness, if you will. Now, I personally believe that we are physical embodiments, that we're basically antennas, we're basically avatars for a cosmological constant of consciousness that has different levels of vibration. You can have low vibration consciousness, which is like rocks and atoms. You can have higher consciousness, which might be like ants and bugs, and then even higher, which would be like monkeys and dogs, then us, and maybe not even higher. Higher is the wrong word. Just a different frequency, just a higher frequency, a greater frequency, or perhaps a lower one, a more energetic one. However it works, without putting a value on it, without putting a judgment on it, a different frequency of consciousness. And we are tuned in, our bodies are tuned into this, where our brains are, they kind of have two purposes, okay? They function as both an antenna, like at least a receiver, if not a transmitter as well. And our bodies are an extension of that. So we're kind of like an RC car, if you will. And part of the process requires that our brains do certain things. It has to hold memories, and it has to have biological impulses and hormones that can change our moods and our emotions. But what we are is not those things. So like when you die, most people, when they pass on, their memories and things will probably be lost. And I'm not saying that's always the case. I think there's exceptions. Or maybe it's always the fact that you take your memories with you, but I kind of don't think so. I think that when you pass on, and death and life are very, very focused on this ego and ego dissolution, because when you pass on, that ego mask has nowhere to go. Since you are not the ego mask, when you disconnect from that consciousness that is that cosmological consciousness, that ego mask doesn't necessarily go with you. So if you identify as that ego mask too strongly, when that happens, it's very traumatic and painful. It's a lot easier to pass on without being so attached to that ego mask. And most of your life is spent teaching you to be unattached for the most part. So this is also going to be, when someone asks me about reincarnation, I may refer back to this video to help explain that, because I think we're going to get into that in one of the next videos. But I hope you guys understand. I hope this gives you guys an interesting perspective on ego and ego dissolution. This is not meant to be a total, complete explanation of it. This is just a fragment of my understanding of it and what I can communicate in a short video. It could take you a lifetime, or it could take you 30 lifetimes, or it could take you 3 seconds to understand this. It really depends on a combination of yourself and what you're able to do. And I don't mean able like you're limited. What you're willing to do is probably the better question. A lot of people don't realize that enlightenment and understanding this is not something you achieve. Rather, it is a thing that you accept, that you ease into, that you just go, oh, I get it. You don't say, I need to know this. How do I know this? Believe me, when you do wake up, when you have your ego dissolution moment, it is as easy as taking your bra off. It's as easy as taking your shoes off. It is not, you are not acquiring, you are not putting on anything, you're not fitting into anything. If anything, you're going, show me your support by making sure to like and comment on this video. Subscribe and hit the bell for updates, and then if you wish, share this video responsibly. If you want to support me further, or want to know more about my practice, or learn to master your own, consider purchasing my high-quality book, Become the Maelstrom. The link is in the description. If you need my help, or want to book my professional services, you can contact me directly on Facebook, or go to FromTheAshesPublishing.com and look for my list of services under Magical Services. If you do not see a specific service or ritual that addresses your concern, contact me and I can tailor-make a custom ritual working just for you. The link for all this are in the description. Thank you, and mind the shadows.